Well, I've decided to share something that is extremely personal for me and even for my entire family. And the reason why I'm sharing it is threefold. Number one, because as a public figure, I realize that there are a lot of people who watch my life and learn lessons from my life. And I feel that I owe them to share a little bit about the significant change that is taking place in my life. Second reason, because I really do believe that there are people who will be helped and encouraged by the fact that God has done something really supernatural in my life. And if He's done it for me, He'll do it for them as well. And thirdly, I think it's important for us all to just live with this process of embracing who we are. You know, we're the sum total of the things we've gone through, good, bad, and indifferent. And in the middle of all the difficulties and difficult circumstances, we can still go back and see the grace of God in the middle of it. So with that said, at the age of 44, I have come to realize and been made aware that the man that I grew up all my life believing was my father, or who was my father growing up, the man who taught me to ride my bike, the man you all heard me tell stories about running to the end of the block to meet him at work after he came home from work, is not actually my biological dad. And it's something that for probably half of my life I've wondered. You know, in my mid-20s I just started wondering, you know, I thought I might have been adopted, or just always wondered, you know, was this my actual dad? And it was more so just because when I looked at my other siblings and then looked at cousins and aunts and people all throughout my family, and I just never really saw anybody else that I looked like. And so I kind of questioned that as I was coming through my mid-20s all the way up until, you know, my 30s. And then somewhere around the year 2000, somewhere in that area, I had a medical incident that was a pretty traumatic medical incident. Everything turned out to be fine. I'm well and healthy today, but at the root of it, once we tracked it down, it ended up being something that was genetic. And when I talked to my mom about it, found out my mom hadn't been diagnosed with this, and then I talked to my dad, found out my dad hadn't been diagnosed with this. And without saying anything to either one of them, I knew then that medically speaking, biologically speaking, it wasn't possible for that to be my mom and dad. And I had obviously grown up with my mom, and I knew the story of her giving birth to me as a teenage girl, so I knew that was my mom. And so I concluded that that couldn't be my dad. And so for the last 14 plus years now, I've lived with this. And it's been a real difficult time for me, you know, because I've been still a public figure, still preaching, still helping other people, trying my best to bless other people's lives, while on the inside I was torn up and just really conflicted, you know, wanting to know the answer, but at the same time afraid to know the answer. And I really found myself in a position where I was literally terrified to find out the truth. And you know, I had questions in my mind about what could it have been, what was the story behind me that was such a big deal that I wouldn't have been told and shared with who my real father was. And you know, thoughts went through my head like, was my mom, you know, raped? You know, was it some type of incest situation? And all types of thoughts that really just left me feeling like, is this one that's better for me to not know the truth than to find out what the truth is? And for the last probably 4 years now, 4 or 5 years, I've just been just tormented. I mean, every year when Father's Day would roll around, I would say to myself, you know, you need to find out the answer. You know, I mean, the more I'm growing up and as I'm getting older and having children of my own, you need to find the answer out. And in the last couple of years, I've really sensed God even saying, trust me, just trust me on this. You don't have to be afraid. You know, you don't have to be filled with fear as to what the answer is going to be. But even with that, I'm a pastor and a bishop and all that stuff, I was still terrified. And there were several times I would take my mom out to lunch or plan to take her out to lunch, and my goal was I was going to sit down and ask her and just have her tell me the truth. And I would always back out of it. That could be a reason why I'd end up canceling the lunch, or for some reason she might have to cancel, and I felt relieved that I didn't have to ask her about it. And then this year I made a decision coming into this year. The Lord dealt me that this was a year of divine connections, and again, He's speaking to me week after week. Trust me, I got you on this. You don't have to be afraid of the outcome. No matter what the answer is, I'm here for you. And so I just decided this year I was not going to let another Father's Day go by without finding out the truth. And so on June the 1st of this year, my mother and I were alone together, and I decided to ask her and ask her the truth about who my father was. And she went back and told me the story that as a 15-year-old girl who was dating my dad that I grew up with, they had a season where they broke up, and she ended up in a relationship with another gentleman by the name of Marvin. And coming out of that relationship, ended up pregnant. And the timing was so close to where she believed it was probably Marvin, but wasn't completely sure, and went and approached him and shared with him that she believes she's pregnant by him, and he didn't respond right. He was a 17-year-old kid at the time, didn't really believe it, didn't take responsibility at the time, and so my mother, being a 15-year-old girl, tucked this away in her heart, and like the Bible says Mary did, just hid all these things in her heart, and for the next 44 years just put her head down and did what was necessary to raise her son. And then, married my father, and eventually they had a son together, my brother Deshaun, and eventually was divorced and remarried and had my younger two siblings. But for all these years, just kind of kept it in her heart and just did whatever was necessary to work, however many jobs needed to be worked in order to take care of her children. And I applauded her and thanked her for sharing that information with me. But I still had a decision then. Now that I know this information, I know the truth, what am I going to do with it? And it took me about 2 weeks. At first I Googled the name of my father and looked him up through the internet, through Facebook, found a Facebook account that had the same name but was a junior. When I clicked on the picture of the person, I was stunned because, we weren't like twins, but there's enough features there that, made it clear that there had to be a connection here. Showed it to my wife, and she was taken aback. And then I went online and found an obituary out there that was an obituary for a young lady who had passed away probably 6 years ago, and who, the more I dug into the obituary, she had been married to the man who was my father. And in her obituary, she mentioned 2 children that they had together, a young lady named Dina and a younger son named Andre. And in that process of looking at the obituary and looking at the pictures in the obituary, I start seeing these pictures of her and her husband, and literally sitting there looking at this obituary, saying to myself and then eventually to my wife April that I think I'm looking at a picture of my biological dad for the first time. And it's hard to describe what that's like when you're just finding this information out. And I'm sitting here looking at pictures thinking, okay, I think this is actually my dad here. And for the next 2 weeks, I end up friend requesting Dina on Facebook and became her friend, and started looking through her pictures, and on Instagram became one of her followers and watched her pictures and saw that she had a family and 2 children and a husband, and just allowed myself to figure out who these people were. There's this other family that I believe is out here that I'm connected to, but I still hadn't decided if I was going to do anything with it. Part of me that was saying, well, you figured it out, close that chapter, move on. Because you don't know. These people may not accept you. If they do accept you, it may not be a good fit. And once you open up that can of worms, you can't put it back in. So you may be better off just to leave it alone. So for 2 weeks, painstakingly every day, went through these pictures, showed them to my wife, started putting the connections together as to who was who. And then finally on Father's Day, I saw that Dina posted a picture on her page on Father's Day that she was at a Detroit Tigers baseball game with her dad and her children. And up until that point, I actually hadn't seen any recent pictures of him. And so I wasn't even sure if he was still alive. So a thought went through my head that you waited all this time, was afraid to find out, and now maybe he's dead. But once I found out that he was alive, I decided I was going to reach out. And whatever the results were, that's what it would be. And so 2 days later, woke up in the middle of the night, and literally about 2 o'clock in the morning, woke up with tears in my eyes and wrote a letter entitled, Dear Dina. And I explained to her everything that I needed to say to her, made the connection back to my mom as a teenager, and sent it through Facebook. And the next morning, I got a telephone call from her, and I wasn't able to take the call. She left a voicemail message and just said that she had got my letter and was very happy I reached out, was really looking forward to talking to me, had shared the letter with her father, and that he was very anxious to talk to me as well. And later on that evening, had a 30-minute conversation with Dina, which was phenomenal. About a half hour later, had a 30-minute conversation with my biological dad. So the first time ever hearing my actual biological dad's voice on the other side of the phone. And we talked for half an hour, and it was a great conversation. Later that week, I was already scheduled to be in Michigan to minister at a church there, and was taking my whole family with me. And so I took the family up, and that Sunday after I preached, went to downtown Detroit, my wife and I, and went and had dinner with my dad and my sister Dina. And when I walked in, laying eyes on my dad for the first time, it was strange. I walked in and we were both dressed alike. Had on blazers with shirts tucked outside of our pants, with blue jeans on and black pointed shoes, about the exact same build. Sat and talked for 2.5 hours, the 4 of us did, and was just blown away. Blown away by just how much we had in common, and just how much our thought processes were alike. And during that conversation, probably no less than 3 or 4 times, he tempted to apologize for just not being man enough as a teenager to accept responsibility, and then not following up afterwards to verify if he really indeed had a son. But he said he had always prayed that if he did have a son out there, that at some point I would find him and that we'd be able to make a connection. And I assured him that, there's no anger or hurt in my heart. Number one, I had no idea this man existed all these years. Had no idea that there was even a father out there to know. And then number two, God had been so good to me. God had blessed my life. My family was well. So I had no hurt or bitterness about him not being a part of my life. If anything, I was just overjoyed that I finally got this one part of my life figured out and got some answers. And so starting from that day, we just began communicating regularly. And didn't even realize, but I think every day from that day on, we would text or talk, just getting to know one another. When I came and met him at the restaurant, I brought him a copy of my book, Passing the Test of Life. And on the inside, I just wrote an inscription that basically said, we can't go back and make up the previous 44 years, but we can start today and build from this point on. And so we've been building from that point on. We've been getting to know each other. Went to our first Detroit Tigers baseball game together, which was amazing. I felt like a little kid. I'm a grown man, but felt like a little kid heading into the game with my father for the first time. Recently went to a Detroit Lions football game together and had an opportunity to introduce him to some of the football players that are from Jacksonville that are now playing with the Detroit Lions, and just having an opportunity to build relationship and get to know one another. And again, our thought processes are so much alike that it's been real easy. And I didn't even realize, because God has blessed me and I've had so many successes in my life, didn't realize how much of a hole and a vacuum I still had in my heart and what I was missing until I've gotten this peace now that has filled that spot in my life. And so it's been a great blessing. My wife and children have met him, and they've fallen in love with him and see a clear connection there, and are grateful for that connection being built. Most of you know I have 3 other siblings that I love with all my heart. My brother Deshaun, my brother Jamal, and my sister Ashley, who we've been together their entire lives, and God has blessed us together. But I've now found out that on my dad's side, I have 3 other brothers and another sister. And so I've gotten to know 2 of my brothers. I had a brother, Will, who's just younger than me, slightly younger than me. I've got a brother whose name is Andre, who's a 22-year-old, who when I was 22, he and I looked like twins from the time when I was a skinny little 22-year-old kid. Then I got another sister, Dina, and meeting her and spent some time with her and her kids and at the amusement park in Michigan, and I've had a chance to meet her husband, Prentice, and my niece and nephew, PJ and Grace, and it's just been a blessing. It's not having to have one family over the other, but God has opened up my heart and allowed me to now have a wonderful family that already existed, and only to find out I got a wonderful family that he's brought into the mix as well. And it's just been a huge blessing, and I'm just really thankful to God. Thank God for my dad, Perry, who raised me, and just being such a godly man who instilled in me just the character of a godly man. The one thing I can say about him my whole life is all these years I have never, ever seen him do or act in some way that I could say was unlike Christ. And the Lord really dealt with me that I was trying to figure out, how did all this happen? How did I end up at 44? What did I miss? And the Lord dealt with me that, no, this is the way I intended for it to be. You needed to get your spiritual DNA from Perry Davis, even though your biological DNA comes from your dad, Marvin. And when that settled, there was a whole lot like Moses. Moses needed to be raised in Pharaoh's house. There are certain things that Pharaoh's house needed to give him that he couldn't have gotten at home. But then when he got to a certain age, it was time for him to go back and connect with his people and even be used by God to help bring deliverance to them. And the thing that finally was a tipping point for me, when I finally decided that I'm going to reach out, is as I was sitting there going back and forth. Well, no, I'm not going to reach out. I'm just going to leave this alone. I'm going to close this door. The Lord dealt with me and he said, son, this is not just about you. He said, I've used you and blessed your life to touch thousands of other people. And what I've placed on your life, this other part of your family needs that as well. And I'm so glad that I overcame that fear and reached out, because the last several months have been just the most amazing time. Just getting to know this other side of my family, putting these pieces together, looking at pictures and seeing folks that I actually look like, and getting to introduce this part of my family to my existing part of my family, and just watching God do something that's just been supernatural has been amazing for me. And again, the reason why I share this, because I really do believe that all of us need to be able to go back and embrace our story. Whatever your story is, it doesn't make it not true because you don't deal with it. And sometimes, just like it was with Joseph, God will take you back through some doors that you think may be really painful. But when God is going through those doors with you, he'll help you go through them and He'll help you come out on the other side extraordinarily victorious. So I'm excited about it, looking forward to the opportunity that my pops, I call them pops, will be here to come to visit us in Florida, getting a chance to meet all of my family here in Florida, my spiritual family and natural family as well, and just watching God do something extremely supernatural.